what to look for when you go out to a field and you collect a tree there. Now a field like this, of course, there's lots of trees. It almost looks like a hedgerow. But where do you start looking? What do you need and how do you decide what tree to get from the field? This is one of my favorite places to go for bonsai trees. This is a professional bonsai grower and they grow these trees, and the trees are in field for maybe a decade or more. They're cut back every single year. They cut the roots every other year, and with that you have a very, very good base for bonsai trees. And when do I go there? There's actually two moments that you can go. You can go in fall or you can go in early spring. This is actually the perfect time. The leaves are changing color, they're starting to drop, and that's the point that the tree is investing lots in roots. So that's the time to go out, collect the tree, dig it up and planting up. I actually remove all the soil now and then I'll pot it up straight away in substrate. And in spring you wait for the buds to swell. But if you go to a place like this, you can see how many trees we have here, and the question is, how do you get to decide what to select? Well, there's two main important things that you need to know before you come. What species and what style. That defines that within this field, where are you going to look? You don't look at the shrub, you look at the trunk. You dive into the tree, underneath the canopy, and you know what? You get very annoyed by a couple of Dutch people who are making jokes on the other side of the camera. Let's switch the camera around and see whether they run away. Now, if you look here at the inside, there's lots of branches, and what you're looking for is actually for a single trunk that emerges here from the base with lots of fine branching lower down. But if it doesn't have branches lower down, you can always use the bigger branches. That is not really an issue. Then here you start to look at the largest. If it needs to be a formal upright, you're in luck. That's this row. If you want something else, you might need to look at another row. It's that simple, really. And I realized that, of course, if you are new to bonsai, it might be a bit of an effort to look for something in a field. There's also trees that are already potted up. Not so many on the tables right now because the winter is coming. He has packed them all away in the back. But this can also be a good start. This was grown in the field for 10, 15, 20 years, cut back, planted up, and this is now a very, very good starter tree for somebody to start building their bonsai. If you look at this trunk, this is actually died off a couple of times. So you have these dead spots, lots of movement, no lower branching, but that's not a problem because the branches will come back. I'll cut this all off later on. And now I'm going to ask Karsten to take a spade and just cut it out of the ground. Similarly, this just looks like one big ball of green, but it is coming home with me and I'll show you at home what I'm going to do with it. It has a very nice old age trunk with lots of movement, some dead spots, a little bit of dieback, but I'm not scared of dieback. Yeah, let's get this out of the ground, bring it in the car and get it potted up. And although these has been cut a couple of times, the roots are still very, very strong. So making a hole on the side so you can get underneath the root ball really helps. The biggest problem is, of course, how do you stop digging? There's so many trees here. Right, back home. A birch and a Japanese maple. And now the question is, of course, how do I get these potted up? There's a few options. The simplest option is actually just to take this and plant the whole thing in the ground. For me, that's not an option because I don't have place in the ground. I actually don't have place in pots either. Second option is to take this and plant it in a pot with all the substrate as it is. The downside there is this soil gets really wet when it starts raining. So I don't really want to do that either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all the field soil, plant it up in coarse substrate. Of course, I have prepared a pot for this, which is roughly the size of the root ball as it is now. I'm going to cut clean all the root ends. And then I'm going to tie it down with the tie down wires. Let's get started. And probably I can just shake the field soil off. And I'll show you that even though these have been cut quite frequently, the roots probably are not optimal. And therefore the next year it's just going to be allowed to grow and establish in the pot. It is quite important to not let the roots dry out during this work. And to have all these broken ends cut clean. There you go. This is the root ball that we have now. And now what I really liked about this tree is just the very wild appearance. Here there's a scar that is halfway healed. Here's a scar that's halfway healed. It is broken on this area. There's lots of dead wood. This is never going to be a pretty bonsai, but it's going to be a cool bonsai. The roots are pretty well laid out. I think just planting it up a little bit at an angle, just like this. If I plant it up like this, you have the scar here, you have the bulge, which is not really nice. Then you have this movement going up into this trunk, which is actually a nice trunk to work with. This I'm not going to keep, I'm just going to shorten. Same with this. And I'm not going to trim all that much besides that. Just a very quick trim, removing some of these longer branches so it is less susceptible to wind, a little bit more stable in the pot later on. And the real styling will happen next year. Now let's get it into a pot. Now for planting I'm using shredded wood, to which I add pumice and zeolite and a bit of lava. And then I add a special component which is sold as filling for your kitten litter. But it is actually diatomous earth. This is a sort of a clay, baked clay, and it works wonders in substrate. This is very dusty, do this outside and not in an enclosed environment. And I just add a little bit of it on the bottom of the pot. And then just place the tree on top of it. And I'm using a 3-point tie down to hold it in place. Basically just squeeze it in there, make sure all the roots are down in the pot. Now when you have it all in place, make sure that the wires are connected to the right side wires, and I just tie down the roots, just like this. And then once I've tied the roots with one set of wires and 2 sets of wires, I actually tie down the wires to each other again. So now it is actually secured by 2 wires, and what I can do is take the ends, push them around the tree, and make sure that this way also they are secured to each other. That way the tree can't go anywhere. And then it's a matter of filling up with substrate. In this case you can see the roots are very open. There's not a lot of space underneath it. I can just fill it up with substrate and be done with it. And this should be sufficient to just get this all rooted in place. Still make sure you move all the substrate down between the roots. A little bit of wiggling can help. And then watering down. And it's all done. Just put it in a spot that it doesn't freeze up over the next 4 weeks. And this is ready for spring. Just beware that trees always get bigger on your way home. They look so small in the field, and when you get them home they're actually quite tall. But this is a very high literati feel. At some point I might actually cut it off here and just work with this and a little bit of foliage here. At that point I might lift it up a little bit more than it is now. But right now this is nice and stable in the pot. I'll let it root in. And here the same challenge. First getting the knots out. uncovering the roots, shaking off the substrate, and then, yeah, let's see how good it is. Now here there's a lot of big roots that I have cut with the spade, or actually that Karsten cut with the spade, and I'll need to clean those up and then I'll plant it up. Now important to realize is I could of course take a lot of branches off now, but because lots of the roots are gone, I might actually just leave it in place until maybe midwinter. That time this tree can then use to work on the roots, get rooted into the pot. We are already in November and I'm not sure when winter is going to start. It could actually be that in 2-3 weeks time we are completely frozen over. So I'm not taking too much risk with this one. It is quite a special tree. But it needs a lot of work cleaning up. But that will be a different video. Now what you can tell quite clearly is here, these are roots that are quite damaged because of the spade. But also there is absolutely no side roots on this. So it doesn't really matter whether I cut it clean here or a lot higher. So I go a lot higher, that aids in planting up. Same for this one. It is actually standing on this one right now, so I'm not going to cut it. But I'm going this way to remove all the roots that don't actually have a lot of side roots, making it a very compact root ball. There are a few smaller roots here that could be from the plants that were growing around it. But even if they are, I have good hope that all these root stumps will start growing roots over the next couple of months. Because the tree is still adjusting. It is still fall. Roots are still growing. But clean cuts are important for good rerouting. And as said, whether it reroots from a long root or a short root, that's not all that relevant for the tree. Now all the roots have been cut back and you can actually get an impression of this tree. And cutting the root back this much is very important to get good roots later on. Because in the end, these cut ends will produce new roots. So next year, there's new roots here. If I then cut back again, because these stumps are too long, then I'm cutting off all the new roots. So it is important to now already go quite short to the trunk. Note, I'm leaving all the sand around the root base, because there might be young roots hiding there. I'm not going to disturb that. And this is all young, thin roots that are going to be in the ground. I'm now just going to put it in a pot, and I'm using a 3-point tie down to hold it in place. And this really requires a little bit of maneuvering to make sure that all the roots are really covered, but you don't use a bigger pot than really necessary. Might actually have to cut the roots back a little bit more. These here are still quite long. Little loop. And now the wire can go back to the rim of the pot. But before I put it too tight, I'm taking the third wire, coming in from the back to the side, and pull this tight. Now it's a matter of filling up the pot with substrate, watering well, and waiting for spring. And with that, this one is also potted up. You can see here, very nice broad base. The roots are not that great if you collect from a field. So that is one of the downsides. If you take a pot grown bonsai or a bonsai that has been in a pot for a couple of years and had a few years of root work done, then the roots are much better than what you have here. This is the sort of root base that you will get, however, when you go for field grown stock. On the other hand, this is full of energy. The branches are strong. You see a nice tapered trunk line. There are some dead points and I'll clean those up in spring or maybe after spring. Here are dead branches that really can go completely. This is part of field growing. You do get, if there's no proper maintenance at all times, some dead parts. But all in all, I am quite happy with this tree. It is a very nice open tree. This branch at some point will have to go, actually. No, I said I was not going to do it because I want to leave it right now as it is. I'll leave it a couple of months, maybe in winter or in spring, I'll do a light pruning. I do see my trunk line to go here all the way in the back, so I might eventually decide to use this as a front, but it is a little bit boring. Anyway, I hope this gives you some idea of what to look for when you go out to a field and you collect a tree there. And if not, there will be a follow-up on this tree. Thank you for watching. This was Jelle growing bonsai, and I wish you an amazing winter.